People with firearms can prevent bad things from happening. The reason you don't see the data there as often, one, the media will not report on it, and two, no one's really paying attention if somebody doesn't show up to shoot somebody because they know somebody has a gun there. I don't take away from the testimony of the girls that were up here, that is their personal opinion. But I know from speaking to my students, where I'm in a district that is predominantly minority, they fear interaction with the police, but they have told me that in the event of an active shooting situation, they want to be in my classroom because they know what my skill set is as a former law enforcement officer and a former soldier in the United States military. Okay? And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Catherine, will you go next?
Certainly. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Catherine Morosky. I live in Austin, and I think it is dangerous to put more guns in schools. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Before I moved back to Austin, where I went to high school for graduate school and education at the University of Austin, I was a high school chemistry and physics teacher in a suburb of New York City. I'll just say that I was actually on campus in the PCL on the day that the young man was stabbed, May of 2017. The campus police disarmed the stabber, and I have no knowledge. I was in the vicinity of the stabbing of this so-called concealed carry holder, campus carry holder who intervened. So that's contested. I love my job as a high school chemistry teacher. Being a science teacher was incredibly rewarding to me. And it was amazing to me to get kids excited about something that's so critical to our nation's future, which is STEM professions. On top of that, I was able to get home to Newtown, Connecticut every afternoon to spend time with my two daughters and to make dinner for my family. It was really the American dream. But that was before December 14th, 2012. That was the day that my younger daughter's friends were killed in their first grade classroom at Sandy Hook Elementary School, which has been referred to several times here today. On that terrible day, in all, 20 first graders and 6 educators were killed. If I slept at all in the months following that terrible day, I had nightmares about a shooter coming to my high school classroom, where I still worked, looking to kill me and my students. And I thought a lot about how I might respond to such a scenario. Would me being armed help in such a situation? And I could never imagine a case where I would be a hero, but I could imagine many where the presence of a gun in my classroom could turn an ordinary day into a tragedy. I became a teacher to prepare young people for bright futures, not to possibly shoot a student or a colleague. I would like my workplace to be secure, but I, like many other people who mentioned this today, have never seen evidence that adding guns to schools makes them more safe. In fact, my understanding that a good guy with a gun stops a bad guy with a gun is a myth. Rather, the presence of guns in any setting is correlated to more death and injury, based upon evidence. So trying to make schools safer by adding guns potentially could do the opposite, which is to make schools less safe places for children and teachers. And to echo what Laura said, I don't want my colleagues carrying guns either, because so many things could go wrong. And I can't think of that many scenarios where the perfect formulation could occur where the hero from across the school runs and saves the day. But I will mention a few ways that we know our society could become safer. States that require background checks on all firearms purchases have lower rates of death and injury. From requiring that firearms be locked up and ammunition stored separately does lessen minors' potential for accessing these items and injuring themselves or bringing them to school. And finally, a red flag law, such as the one recently passed in Florida, can help in making sure that people looking to harm others and have their access to firearms limited before they get a chance to take them into a school. And I'll just add on, because I heard a couple of kind of misconceptions about what did happen in Newtown. The individual who went to the school and murdered first graders and teachers was an individual who had attended many schools in Newtown. He had a connection to Sandy Hook School. He went there as an elementary student. This disturbed person, actually, when he was an elementary age student. He was 21 years old when he perpetrated these crimes. But when he was in elementary school, he actually made a little storybook called Grandma's Got a Gun, and her cane was a weapon. So it was known that he had some fantasies about killing people for a long time. But he went to Sandy Hook, from what is known, not because his mother was a teacher there. She was not. She was a person who spent all her time trying to actually get help for her son, but he had so many problems. But simply because that was a school that he could go to. There was police presence around all of the Newtown schools, and the response time to that school was about 4 minutes. But my belief is that the type of guns that the shooter had was the reason that there was such a high death toll at that site, because he had the kind of weapon with the kind of ammunition that could really just tear apart these small bodies at such a rate that even though Newtown police were able to respond within 4 minutes, the death toll was high for that reason. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, any questions? Okay, thank you. Mr. Rabb? Did I say that right?
Certainly.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer, Chairman Flynn, committee members. I'm Ted Rabb with Texas AFT, American Federation of Teachers. I want to say, first of all, how pleasant it was to hear your recognition of the difficulty that teachers often face in exercising their statutory authority to remove students. What you pointed out is something that I hear from members across the state, and I think my colleagues in other organizations have a similar experience. It's good to know that that members of the legislature are aware of that difficulty. I also want to say that it's great that you all are here at this hearing, and I've heard some excellent testimony, and that the House in general has spent this entire week hearing about a lot of different aspects of the issue of school safety and security. Excuse me. And I think one thing is clear is that this is not a problem that's going to get addressed simply in one committee. It is a systemic problem. And I want to note that Texas AFT sees itself as part of solving this problem. In particular, we have been very involved in the Houston area. This was a response to the hurricane, but it applies to other things that affect schools, like school shootings. We've been very involved in trauma training, and it turns out that this has paid benefits as well for those who were in the area who felt threatened or in one way or another affected after the more recent school shooting in Santa Fe, and we'll continue to do that work. I heard nothing in the first session that y'all heard, and I know that I'm not going to endanger any bills, so I just take the privilege to say something quick about that. I heard nothing in the first session that y'all had to suggest that legislative action was necessary on whether could play a greater part in ensuring school safety. Obviously, that's a valuable talent pool on which districts can draw, but they already do, as I think you heard. And so I didn't hear anything that suggested that further action was necessary. With respect to this particular issue on which personnel should be armed in school districts, we have on several occasions in a variety of different ways made efforts to hear from our members directly about what their desires were. And I will tell you that the message came through very strongly that we endorse providing school districts the funding sufficient for them to hire dedicated, professional, certified, and fully trained law enforcement officers and appropriate support personnel. We do not support arming teachers and other school employees whose primary mission is not direct school safety and security. We don't have a position. We did actually oppose the school marshal bill as it was being brought forward. We don't have a position in favor of repeal, but we would almost certainly oppose expanding that program. I think the most important message, though, that I want to convey, and it can be a tough one, is we've got to provide the resources. The state has to provide the resources to school districts, and that primarily means money, so that the local school districts can make the decisions that are right for their communities to ensure student safety. And our members and teachers and other school employees across the state will play a part in implementing those local plans. I appreciate being here with you and being able to share that.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Mr. Johnson?
I know it's late and I want to go home too, because I gotta drive all the way back to Houston, but thank you guys so much for coming down. You guys that are educators, tell me this, when you see that your students are not proficient in a certain area, do you generally put more resources into the area that they are not proficient, or do you put resources into the area where they are most proficient?
Well, what I do is I try to find out why they're not proficient in the first place. Sorry about that. Did you hear what I said?
Yeah,
Okay. I try to find out why they're not proficient in that area. Firstly, because it could be a teacher issue.
Well, all I'm just trying to figure out,
Right,
if you now can't read, do you spend more time on math, or do you spend time with reading?
Well, for me, as a criminal justice teacher, I don't teach math. I teach courts, corrections, principles of law, constitutional law, stuff like that. So I have 5 different classes that I teach throughout the day. What I find is I get a lot of students that cannot read or write, and that is a very basic premise of law enforcement. So we spend a lot of time on reading and writing outside of the also normal teach that I have to teach them.
Anybody else?
Similarly, I taught chemistry and physics, so mathematics is an important part of that. And if a student doesn't have basic capabilities in mathematics, we might spend time on those fundamentals in order then to address the deficiencies in that area. But certainly I wouldn't teach them Shakespeare if they needed to be able to solve for a variable.
If you guys have been here any length of time, then you know all of my questions are loaded. So this is just nothing more than another loaded question. Simply because I will say to you, the number 3 killer of all teenage children is suicide. And when you look at the numbers of children that are committing suicide, those that are harmed in schools feloniously or through homicide, the homicide certainly pales in comparison. So, and I don't take any life for granted, but the question is, we all know that most of the kids that are committing these crimes, even the adults that are committing these crimes, have some form of mental illness. Because they oftentimes want to use the cops as the mechanism by which they want them to commit suicide for them. It's suicide by cop. And so arming the teachers tells me, and arming the guardians or marshals or whoever the case may be, we understand that they will still commit the crime. But we certainly, as for the guardian standpoint, we just want to minimize the number of people who are injured. But at the end of the day, we just know it's still going to happen. So can we put more making sure that the kids don't get to that point before we decide that we want to start arming people that then incite as opposed to prevention.
I don't disagree with your point, Representative Johnson, but the thing that I would like to point out is that part of prevention is being prepared for the act to take place. When you look at 10 dead bodies versus 2 dead bodies, okay? Each loss of life is harsh to deal with. And when you look at it, it's like, okay, do I want to go to 10 funerals or do I want to go to 2? That's not a question anybody ever wants to answer. But right now, that is the question that we are being forced to answer. And I understand where you come from Houston. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of death and stuff that happens there, and you deal with that in the streets. But we're being forced to answer a question now that nobody wants. Nobody wants to put guns in the school. Honestly, I don't want guns there. I wanted to be able to go into a school and teach and focus on sharing knowledge. But right now, we've had five mass shootings here that I can name. We had Luby's, we had 3 on Fort Hood, we had Sutherland Springs, we had Santa Fe, and we had the Dallas shooting where 5 police officers were shot and killed. That is the reality of the world that we live in. Now, we can either choose to accept that reality as it is and prepare for it and try to defend against it by taking those resources and doing better for mental health. But doing better for mental health, like everybody has said here, is not going to prevent the action from taking place.
I do want to gently steer the conversation back to the interim charge of the school marshal program.
That's all I had.
Representative Johnson, did you have anything else? Thank you. Mr. Crucial.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is CJ Grisham. I'm a retired senior counterintelligence agent and Army First Sergeant. I'm here representing myself and as a father and a veteran, but I'm also representing Open Carry, Texas. One of my primary functions as a CI agent was operational and physical security and force protection, to include conducting threat vulnerability assessments. And some of this testimony, I don't know what happened, but I was signed up to speak this morning and wasn't called, so somewhere I got lost in the digits. So some of this is gonna jump back and forth. But it is specific also to the school marshal program from a veteran standpoint. Prior to participating in the invasion of Iraq on March 20th, 2003, I was responsible for the physical security of several forward operating bases and other bases within Kuwait to identify weaknesses and vulnerabilities. During that time, I also served in direct combat, as well as security and stabilization operations. While in Afghanistan in 2012, I was directly responsible for physical security and force protection at Kandahar Airfield. I've heard a lot of testimony from law enforcement about the prospect of using veterans to assist in performing school security functions. And what stuck out to me is a reluctance to allow veterans, or really anyone for that matter, to assist them in protecting our communities and school children. Granted, that's not universal, but it seems to be the general consensus is that police want just more police, and everybody wants more police, and the solution is more police and more government, and yet it's the government and the police that are failing to prevent these things. It's extremely dangerous to consider a military occupational specialty, or MOS, as the sole basis for determining who is qualified within the veteran community. Representative Wilson said something earlier today that I don't think was truly understood, and it was sort of, we sort of moved past really quickly about the experience of modern day veterans. For more than a decade, our troops have engaged in security and stability operations, not necessarily direct combat operations. Those responsible, and I promise I'm going to get to this ties in. Those responsible to run those operations run the gamut of MOSs. You'll find cooks, engineers, supply specialists, military police, infantry, air defense artillery, tankers, NBC specialists, intelligence specialists, and many more. They all work security, they all work the gates, they all work the towers, and they're all looking for threats. Among the topics covered in the school marshal course are, according to TCOL, physical security, improving the security of the campus, use of force, active shooter response, and weapons proficiency. Every soldier, to some degree, is trained on how to recognize a threat. Essentially, it's my understanding we're looking for the kind of school security that is similar to what we currently have in society at large. If an individual sees a threat in public, he or she has the option and ability to defend himself or herself against that threat until the police can respond and take over authority of the scene. Our schools should be afforded these same protections. It doesn't take especially detailed training or specific types of military experience to accomplish this. If a veteran is licensed to carry a firearm in self-defense or defense of others in public like everyone else, I don't see how doing so in a school is any different. Veterans are trained to both identify threats and protect the innocent. Those with a license to carry are as well. It is vital that those of us who are willing to stand on the line for our country be able to stand on the line for our children and educators. Likewise, if a teacher or administrator is licensed to carry in defense of himself and others elsewhere in society, they shouldn't be disarmed on campus. These teachers and administrators carry before school, they carry after school, they carry during their time off, they carry on the weekends, they carry over the holidays, they carry everywhere else in society, and we trust them, but for some reason we suddenly don't trust them to carry in a school. This makes absolutely no sense. It's as if there's a bubble of stupidity that when someone walks onto a school, they lose their mind. I find that society isn't any different on a school grounds than they are off of school grounds. The best way to expand the school marshal program and protect our children is to remove the ability of school districts to determine whether or not they want to take part in the program. The program should not be mandatory, but they should also not prevent teachers and faculty who are lawfully armed and licensed to be able to take part in it. According to our Constitution, only the legislature has the power to regulate the wearing of arms, not local governments or school districts. With 9 out of 10 school districts in Texas refusing to protect their students and faculty by taking part in the program, we can see how making it voluntary has failed our children. On Monday, I testified that we have a school safety program right now that should be a utopia of safety for our children. It doesn't matter if you're under 17, over 17, licensed, unlicensed, adult, child, male, female. It doesn't matter who you are, a gun is banned on school property unless you are a law enforcement officer, and yet we still have shootings. So obviously the laws are not working. Currently, 14 states allow teachers to carry firearms on campus. Another 16 give local school boards the authority to decide whether school staff can carry guns, either explicitly or through legal loopholes. But officials say they don't really know of any instances of armed teachers in those other 16 states. Here in Texas, teachers have carried guns for over 10 years. Most of those school districts that allow teachers to carry began doing so in the aftermath of the 2012 mass shooting in Sandy Hook. Other states took those steps that include Indiana, Georgia, a few other states. I can give those to you later. Allowing teachers to be armed in self-defense is much more economical than hiring school resource officers or security personnel. Officials in Clarksville School District in Arkansas decided to allow teachers to arm themselves in 2013. Hiring a school resource officer can cost the district approximately $50,000 for one person. That same school district found they were able to train 13 school staff members for around the same price on how to use a gun in a crisis. Some of this might echo what Terry Holcomb said earlier, but some ideas to fix our program. School marshals need to be able to carry on their bodies so they can immediately respond to a threat. It does no good if a threat happens while I'm in a classroom next door, if I'm down the hall, if I'm in the principal's office, if I'm in the bathroom. We need to abolish school zones completely. Gun-free zones do not work and only contribute to death tolls. Remove the ability of school districts to opt out of the school marshal and guardian programs. We have got to stop thinking that government can solve all of our problems. Are we not responsible for our own communities, or must government do everything for us? This has been painted as a contest between guns and protecting lives, when in fact, guns are the very things that protect lives. Yes, guns are used to take lives, but so are knives, but that doesn't mean I should be prevented from making a delicious peanut butter and jalapeno jelly sandwich. There was a quote about Nelson Mandela and education. I have another quote from Mr. Mandela. Nonviolence is a good policy when conditions permit. Sometimes the only thing that can stop violence is violence, and we need to have the tools to be able to stop violence and stop disarming our teachers. The firearm is the greatest equalizer. It is unconscionable to disarm a faculty member willing and able to defend himself, herself, and others. And I leave that with your questions.
Members, any questions? Okay, thank you all for your testimony, and I just want to add one editorial comment, is that I think I speak for all members that have been on the panel, plus committee members, is that we appreciate you all coming. I've had countless conversations along these lines back home, okay? Left, right, center, everybody's listening, okay? And everybody's talking about this, and even when we were dying, Cassandra Littlejohn